Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 48 of the RDI conference, Planning for Future Disruptions. My name is Chris Adams. I work at the Institute for Human Security and Social Change at La Trobe University. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Kulin people, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, at first glance, planning and disruption can seem like a contradiction in terms. I'm very pleased to be joined by several speakers today who can help us navigate that contradiction, including speakers from TetraTech International, the University of Queensland, and IWDA. We'll have 3 presentations this morning, each followed by Q&A. So please add your questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and vote up your preferred questions. If we have time at the end, we can take questions to be addressed to the whole panel. I'd now like to welcome Vicki Vaartjes and Amanda Schiller from TetraTech to talk about opening pathways through disruption by adaptive management.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Just sharing my screen. There we go.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Chris. I also want to acknowledge the First Peoples of the Yuin Nation, which is where my home stands and where I'm presenting from today, and pay my respect to elders past, present, emerging, and future. Thanks firstly for the opportunity to present some of the findings of our inquiry into adaptive management as an approach to program delivery that offers pathways through disruption. We have looked at theory and practice, including through the eyes and experience of international scholarships and human resource development programs that we deliver across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. As is often the way, our inquiry started with questions. We acknowledge that our clients often specify adaptive management in procurements and program delivery. So we wondered what adaptive management means and how it works, in particular, how it shows up in practical terms through leadership, systems, cultures, and ways of working. And we wondered particularly in the light of our current experience of the disruption due to COVID-19 pandemic, what adaptive management might offer and what this means for us and for our clients.
Acknowledge here that what we're talking about today has emerged from a long trajectory of increased complexity and sophistication in the way that we work both as donors and as aid practitioners. Over time, the focus of development assistance has broadened from a largely donor-driven approach focused on addressing the symptoms of poverty and insecurity to a much more complex endeavour which now seeks to work inclusively and holistically with partner governments and a broad range of other stakeholders to address underlying social, cultural, political, legal, and environmental factors that prevent, obstruct, or slow progress towards higher levels of human development. Alongside this progression, the theoretical and technical knowledge and capabilities within our sector continues to grow. We are ever more focused on ensuring that the work we do is effective, and our monitoring, evaluation, and learning approaches have become increasingly sophisticated. And of course, our operating environments remain ones that are characterised by constant change and high levels of disruption.
So this brings us to where we are now. We are in the midst of a period of unprecedented disruption, and this offers a unique opportunity to observe and learn. So what is the nature of disruption, and what are the implications for the program delivery environment? We acknowledge that programs always experience varying levels of disruption. So for the purposes of this discussion, we have referenced the kind of extremes that we have experienced over the last 18 months. Disruption brings increased uncertainty and potential for occasional periods of chaos. We see information vacuums and the proliferation of misinformation. Surrounding this, we see rapidly emerging situational and contextual changes. And these volatile conditions mean that programs face new risks and challenges to continuity. Programs may struggle to find agreement about the best way forward and look critically for evidence and to their leadership for guidance. In moments like these, programs need to be able to rely on the information and data that is available to them and on their understanding of their operating context to inform their situational responses. Disruption naturally affects people and brings heightened levels of anxiety and disturbance to everyday program life. People become more distracted, worried, and look to leadership to provide intensive support and timely communication. Disruption may also result in significant changes to their ways of working, added to already heightened concern. For policy-directed program environments, disruption can challenge policy settings and require rapid adjustment. Where disruption is significant, we also see potential for politicization of the issues and of the potential fixes, which can also affect the speed and direction of policy adjustments. For programs, this uncertainty can mean operating in policy vacuums, which adds risk and heightens the need to proactively advocate to clients for specific policy directions. Disruption affects the competitive environment as well, where perceptions of scarcity of opportunity can mean changes in the risk behaviour of service providers and managing contractors, who may become more or less conservative, take different kinds of risks, or become more unpredictable in their pursuit decisions. Lastly, and importantly, disruption can reduce our confidence in the expert knowledge we would usually rely upon. When the situation is unprecedented, knowledge that's grounded in the past becomes less relevant, and programs need to generate situated knowledge through social learning and using approaches to program management that encourage us to think and act differently. So in the light of this, we can re-examine adaptive management and explore what it offers.
We acknowledge that there are many, many definitions of adaptive management out there and that these have been captured pretty comprehensively in the existing literature. But we have TetraTech, it's on the screen for you right now. So we believe that adaptive management is like using a compass rather than a map. It's an intentionally exploratory approach to programming in complex or uncertain environments where it's not always possible to fully plan or predict the best solution to a problem at the beginning of the intervention. Adaptive management involves iterative, continuous improvement by monitoring, critical review, learning and refining activities that are relative to the operating context in order to maintain relevance and to achieve results. In tandem with our working definition, TetraTech uses what we call the 6 Ps of adaptive management to frame our thinking. These are all of the core components that we've identified as being critical to the success of an adaptive approach. And they are political insight, which means maintaining awareness of the broader political context and being alert to changes within it. Partnerships. In a more flexible programming approach like adaptive management, it's essential that donors, partner governments, and managing contractors can develop strong and trusting relationships and mutual understanding. The third one is people. So we know that it takes a certain skill set to work successfully in an adaptive context. Strong communication, teamwork, analytical and systems thinking, and the level of comfort with ambiguity are all important. Principles, a strong mutual understanding of principles that will underpin decision-making is essential, as is a common understanding of the shared goal. The second to last one is practice. So we know that our operational practices need to be set up in a way that creates space and opportunities for adaptive thinking. It takes time. Our monitoring and evaluation systems and protocols need to be integrated in such a way that we have access to relevant, real-time information that enables data-informed decision-making. And the final one is process. Structures and systems need to enable adaptive approaches. So procurement, contracting, risk management, performance evaluation, delegations of authority, all of these things, depending on their design, can enable or inhibit adaptiveness.
So this brings us to what we know as a result of our inquiries and our analysis. We know that our working definition is an ideal that's not always achieved and arguably isn't always required. We know that our programs operate with constraints that limit the extent to which adaptive management is possible. For example, the limits to adaptivity created by delivery contracts. We notice that adaptive management is operationalized across our programs in different ways and to varying extents. And we also notice that despite these differences, there are common understandings about adaptive management and what it means in practical terms. For example, the idea that adaptive management concerns the capacity to course correct and effectively respond to situational issues, and the critical importance of reliable monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. We think that there are different forms of adaptive management and that it would be helpful to take a more nuanced approach to what adaptive management can mean in different program contexts.
So as we've been exploring how adaptive management plays out across our programs, it became very clear, as Vicki's just said, that adaptive management covers a really broad spectrum. Depending on the circumstances, the appropriate adaptive responses might take place in a fast and reactive way or a slower and more considered way. And likewise, adaptive responses might be highly adaptive. That to us means adaptations that are strategic with the potential to fundamentally change the vision and outcome of a program. Or it might be a lower adaptive change, so still implementing changes in response to the environment, but largely operational changes which still fit within the boundaries of the program design and the contract, and without any adjustment to the intended program outcomes. So with this in mind, and through our discussions and research, we've developed this matrix, which describes kinds of adaptive responses across 4 quadrants, based on whether they are fast or slow and low or high adaptiveness. So I'll talk you through it now. In the bottom left quadrant, we've called a slow and considered low adaptive response business as usual. This kind of response is characterised by adaptations that are implemented gradually and usually through traditional monitoring and evaluation and annual planning cycles. So these might be in response to a gradual change in the operating environment where the aim is to maintain program coherence, relevance and stability whilst bringing about continuous improvement. So an example that we've seen of this in our programs was the gradual improvement in participation of women in a scholarship program following a carefully planned series of initiatives that took place over a number of years that were designed to increase applications from women. Top left-hand quadrant, a faster and more reactive but still largely operational and low adaptive approach is characterised by, we think, a focus on risk management, and we've called this course correction. It's about ensuring program continuity in the face of a significant challenge or interruption, with the aim being to restore program coherence. And an example of this might be the pivot that most of us made from office-based and face-to-face work arrangements to home-based and online working arrangements in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we kept our programs operational by shifting the way we work. In the bottom right-hand quadrant, we've called a slower but highly adaptive strategic change, strategic reinvention. So this is relevant in a situation where changes in the environment might challenge the program relevance or the viability of the current operating framework and the theory of change. The aim here might be to re-envision the program outcomes and intentions, or to substantially change the program design. These things take a lot more time to think through, but an example here, again in the context of scholarships programs, might be the shift to online and alternate delivery models for program beneficiaries, play of in Australia and on-campus study. And this is a really revolutionary approach to managing these programs, which have always been focused on bringing students to Australia. Finally, in the top right-hand quadrant, a highly adaptive, fast and reactive approach might be called competing interests. This is where the challenges or changes and risk is such that we need to regain program coherence and relevance. So this is a chaotic situation. An example of when this might be relevant is a political coup or a conflict situation. And as a result, it might be necessary to completely reevaluate the investment as well as the modality. So for us, this working framework helps us to contextualise the kinds of adaptive approaches that we are likely to see across the various programs that TetraTech manages. But it's a working model and we would absolutely welcome your comments and your feedback.
So this brings us to how we want to conclude, which is with more questions. When it comes to partnerships with our clients and others, we wonder if we want to enable more agility, what different structural arrangements and program delivery models, and what trust and communication is needed between client and contractor to make this possible. To build foundations for political insight, we wonder about the ways we can strengthen our political and contextual knowledge to know what kind of adaptive management is appropriate in different situations. When it comes to processes, are we prepared to value adaptive processes, accept the risks they bring, and invest the time and resources accordingly? And are we prepared to do this even when it is not specified by the client? Considering principles, we wonder what it would take to create the kind of participatory and human-centered adaptive cultures that underpin our capacity to apply adaptive management effectively in our programs. And for our program teams, how can we encourage everyone to think critically, act systemically, and use data to inform decision-making so that everyone is part of the learning system? And finally, how can we attract, recruit, manage, and reward people with the competencies required to implement adaptive approaches? We plan to continue to explore these questions and to share our findings. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to present.
And thank you, Vicki and Amanda. Wonderful presentation. I particularly like the focus on the 6 Ps and your adaptive approach to learning about what helps and hinders adaptation in practice. I can throw it open to questions now. People would like to enter questions into the Q&A box. We have one there at the moment, but that's more a general question, which I think I'll save to the end. If there are no questions, Vicki and Amanda, I'll just ask one. I wonder what's your thinking on how donor practices help or hinder adaptive management at present?
Look, that's a really interesting one. And we have, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, it just told me I was muted still. We had lots of discussions. Amanda, please feel free to kick in. But, you know, it's a sensitive area. You know, obviously we work closely with our clients who are donors in this case. And we recognise that there are specific requirements around contracting, around contract management, around the structure and the process for designs, and how that then shows up in the way that the programs are defined and where the accountability for delivery lies, which can be quite constraining. And, you know, there's lots of reasons why those things are in place, and I acknowledge that. But for the purposes of being adaptive, our clients ask for adaptive practice in our approach often, but it can be very constrained because of those factors. So I think it for us, we came into this in a sense with an understanding that everybody asks for this in a sense, but it can be really difficult to deliver. And so we came in, as I said at the beginning, with those questions. What do we mean when we're talking about adaptive management? What does it mean for clients? What does it mean for contracting and all practicalities around program management and program delivery? Yeah, don't know whether you wanted to add more there, Amanda.
I think you've covered it really nicely.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Vicki and Amanda.
Wonderful.
I'd now like to welcome Ray Maher from the University of Queensland to talk about Pathfinder Pacific, co-developing a strategy toolkit for navigating disruption and shaping the future. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you very kindly, Chris, and also Vicki and Amanda. And I'll just mention, Vicki and Amanda, it looks like some new questions are popping up in the chat as well, which I think you can answer via text or at the end. I'm sure more will keep flowing in. G'day, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ray Maher from the University of Queensland. I work at the Centre for Policy Futures, and my work focuses on sustainable development strategy, which of course is a pretty broad thing. And I think we'll see a lot of overlap between some of the issues that I'm working with, of course, and what we've just heard from Vicki and Amanda, which was really interesting. So the piece of work that I'm talking about really began as a partnership between the Pacific Community, or SPC, and the Centre for Policy Futures at the University of Queensland. So just before COVID struck, the Pacific Community had begun the process of developing their 10-year strategic plan for their organisation. So the Pacific Community is, and I'll probably call it SPC from now on, as I'm used to, but that's who it is. They're the largest provider of science and technical advice for the Pacific, and they're owned and governed by their 26 member nations. They've got about 650 staff and 8 different divisions that cover everything from fisheries, energy and geoscience, gender equity, a very wide range of areas, and they're all supporting sustainable development across the Pacific. So Emily Sharp, who's the Director of Strategy at SPC, had reached out to us at the Centre for Policy Futures to sort of accompany them in the development of their strategic plan. So there's 3 really core factors which I'd just like to introduce at the beginning, and I think we'll see alignment with the bit of presentation we just heard. And these 3 core factors are really driving the way that we need to respond to these sorts of complex questions. So the first factor is kind of driven by the Great Acceleration. So this was a study that looked at different trends in society and the economy and Earth systems, and it just showed that everything is changing at a faster and faster pace. And when many different things are changing rapidly all at once, that drives major disruptions and shifts in the way things used to work compared to how they might now. So that first real driving factor in the way we had to approach this challenge of strategic planning is the Great Disruption. You know, we're seeing a huge amount of this at the moment, of course, and these rates of change are really driving disruption, which makes for particularly uncertain futures. So whether that's environmental change, social change, geopolitical change, and of course, we're now seeing the changes from COVID. So SPC's governing body is really conscious of these disruptions and the risks and opportunities that they bring both to the region and to SPC as an organisation. So to help navigate these changes, they requested the use of a futures approach or a foresight approach to developing their strategic plan. So that's one factor, the Great Disruption. The second core factor is that we live in this highly connected world. You know, we hear about social ecological systems, if that's your field of research, and we see different ways of describing this all the time. But just for example, you know, the way that ecosystem change and food and resources are constantly influencing each other, as is changes in population, mobility, culture, governance, and geopolitics. They're all very, very closely interconnected. So whether your particular interest is gender equality or economic development, and whether your interest is in one nation or another or a regional area, those issues are all influenced. You know, the area of your focus is influenced by a whole range of other factors. So unfortunately, sort of just knowing our bit really isn't enough. We need to understand this broader context, and we need to understand how these different components of the world are connected and influencing each other all the time. So because of those first two, the third core factor that we really need to consider is the need for diverse perspectives. And of course, we've heard about this throughout the conference so far, and I agree. The issues are so complex that no one perspective can really do justice in making sense of it. It's only when these different perspectives all come together that collectively, by sharing their knowledge and experience, that we can collectively make sense of what's going on. And of course, the process of doing that also helps to build social learning, and it builds trust and ownership. And all of that is important for strategic planning, not only to make a better strategic plan, but also to implement the initiatives. If they're owned by the people who they affect, that's going to be a very big difference in what that looks like on the ground. The same, of course, is also true for all different types of sustainable development initiatives. So, I mean, there's some big issues, and they're complex, and each of these things, navigating the Great Disruption, considering the interconnected nature of the world we live in, and incorporating diverse perspectives. Each of them are difficult to do, but important. But doing them all together, of course, is even more so. And that challenge goes up again when we're considering doing that in the context of a global pandemic. So with that as the foundation of our strategic planning, but also of other sustainable development initiatives, we developed a toolkit, what we being the Pacific community and myself at Centre for Policy Futures UQ. And this toolkit's called Pathfinder Pacific. It provides frameworks and guided processes to support systems thinking and foresight so that we can do these three things together and make better decisions, inform better strategy. So the three core components, which I'll just speak through briefly in a moment. The first relates to horizon scanning. So that's about really understanding the forces which are driving change in the Pacific and how the future is being changed. The second is systems mapping. So ways of seeing the broader context and understanding those broader relationships beyond our immediate sphere of influence. And the third is scenarios. So these are ways of exploring choices for an organization's future, or looking at different ways that we could progress a particular sustainable development initiative. And what this looked like, and the way we did this in this case, was firstly, there was a lot of collaborative engagement and knowledge synthesis. That was the core of what we were doing. So we had 5 different online engagement activities, and across those activities, there was 152 staff from SPC representing 8 different divisions, and 7 staff academics from across the University of Queensland, each with experience working with and for the Pacific. And all of this was coordinated using an interactive online platform. So in this first activity, participants scanned the horizon to identify some of the forces driving change in the Pacific. And then the second activity really helped to make sense of those driving forces and what they might mean for SPC. I've also noted there's a question in the chat that came up around what are those drivers of disruption. So I've put some comments in there, and I'll talk about it a little now as well. So the real purpose of this is to understand what we're missing. Because if you're missing something significant when making big decisions, that's a big deal. There's the consequences of that can be really significant. So to help understand what these driving forces were, participants worked in 7 different groups to identify some of the forces driving change under each of these different categories. And by using a framework like this, it really helped people to expand their thinking beyond their existing expertise and their immediate responsibilities. Even though they're grounded in that sort of discipline knowledge or that experience in a particular region or nation or area, we all have to think beyond that when we're developing strategy and thinking of the bigger picture. So this was a really extremely productive session. There was 44 contributors from across SPC, each of these, this is, I mean, you can't read any of this, of course, but this is just to show there was these 49 different whiteboards. Each group used a different set of whiteboards, and collectively there was over 600 unique driving forces were identified. And of course, this insight is really based on centuries of combined knowledge and expertise living and working in the Pacific. And importantly, these driving forces are unique to the Pacific context. They're very different from the types of issues that we see when you do a futures activity in Singapore and you hear about, you know, electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and whatever it is as the big drivers have changed. What we discovered was unique to the Pacific. I'll move on, but we can come back to this and also look at the question I answered in the chat. I won't go through this again, but we looked at and used an impact uncertainty matrix so that we could cluster those 600 drivers of change into some of these different subsets, and then different groups considered how impactful they were on SPC and how certain or uncertain they were about what that would mean. And from that, we could identify some of the significant trends, which were both impactful and also quite certain. So people are quite confident that there is significant social change, big changes in the health of the environment, and the need for a strategic recovery beyond COVID. And we could also identify some of the critical uncertainties. So these are issues where they're a big deal, they're highly impactful on what we're trying to do, but there's also a lot of uncertainty about how they might unfold. And there's some issues that we really need to explore further so they don't trip us up as we're developing strategy or implementing development initiatives. So now this really is just a quick scan over to give you an idea of what it looks like, and I'm happy to discuss any of it more. So the third activity, participants really built on the knowledge that they'd shared in the first two to propose specific visions and strategies for SPC. But to do so, we had to help people and work with them to bring sort of their thinking to a more holistic perspective so that we can have a more comprehensive strategic plan. So we developed a systems map. Again, I don't expect anyone can read it in detail, but you can see it shows some of the core components of SPC, the capabilities that they do, how they relate to their member nations, different partnering organizations, governance, and some of the qualities of SPC. So a whole range of issues and how they're connected. And over the top of that, we considered it through 3 different scenarios. So the first scenario looked at, how might this system change under business as usual? So we're imagining the world has changed, but SPC hasn't. The second scenario, we considered incremental improvement, small changes over time. What might that look like? And the third was transformation. So I'm reimagining SPC as an organization. And by looking at those different systems maps and considering those 3 different scenarios, business as usual, incremental improvement, and transformation, participants really took on a very high level examination of their organization and how it might change. So there was hundreds of comments across 15 different virtual whiteboards, and the comments ranged from sort of high level whole of systems issues to specific components about a new IT system that they might need. They included challenges that they were facing, different visions for the future and potential solutions. And they represented different levels of change. What do we need to retain? What's okay, but we should optimize, and where do we need to transform? I mean, and that to achieve that with that level of knowledge from those people is a pretty big deal. That's a difficult thing for people to do, and they did a just phenomenal job of unpacking that. So from that, and I'm coming to a close, from that we really identified, we sort of synthesized all of these little dots that you can see. Each one of them is a comment that people had made on somewhere on that systems map in relation to those key issues. So from that, we identified 11 main themes related to SPC culture, different capabilities, corporate activities, relationships with members, etc. And for each of those themes, staff identified challenges, visions, and solutions, and we combined them into these guidance notes, which is almost a menu of possible strategies that SPC could use to help achieve their goals in those areas. And remember, all of that is based on a knowledge of those big driving forces of change that we identified in the first areas. So the types of strategies that we're seeing are holistic, they're fit for purpose, they're built on a shared understanding, they've got buy-in from a very wide range of participants, and they're fit for the future. So some of the findings of this process, and using Pathfinder Pacific, a diverse team of 160 people have shared their knowledge, and the contributions have been quite a few. So firstly, we've applied this to SPC's whole of organisation transition plan, which is a sort of response to COVID. It's been applied in organisational division business plans for social development, fisheries and IT, etc. And it's being applied now in SPC's upcoming 10-year strategy or strategic plan. And finally, some of this also helped to inform the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific regional continent, and also in Australia, DFAT's submission to that Blue Pacific strategy. So a brief reflection, so a 30-second reflection, I'll say, on this process. So the whole activities, all of the activities were mutual capacity building. I've just learned a phenomenal amount myself along the way, and others also developed skills in applying foresight and systems approaches. The responses were uniquely Pacific and really grounded in that Pacific location. They built trust and relationships across an organisation and ownership of where they might go, and all of it was done in an online environment during a COVID pandemic. So these sorts of, it's a robust approach, and we can apply it in very different areas. So I suppose as a question back to the audience, as Vicki and Amanda left with, I suppose I do wonder, in your different areas that you're working in, are there examples of applying foresight or systems thinking? How do you sort of integrate diverse perspectives in developing sustainable development initiatives? And if not, what might your area of development look like if those approaches were taken? How might that vision change? I will end there for the moment, but thank you very much for your attention. Keen to hear some questions if you've got any.
Thank you, Ray. I'm in awe of that virtual collaborative process, let alone the conceptual frames and approaches which informed it. Extraordinary. Looking at the questions there, lagging behind, so there's questions there for Vicki and Amanda. It may take some time for questions to pop up for you. So I suggest we move on to the third presentation, and then if we have time at the end, we'll take questions.
Sounds good, Chris. I'll just note there's in the questions pad, because this is new to me as well, there's the open questions, of which there are 2. There's also some answered questions. So if people are looking across them, there's 5 other already answered questions that have come up. Yes. Might be interesting there. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Ray. I'd now like to welcome Alice Ridge and Sophia Potter, an Australia Awards Scholar, to report back on IWDA's pre-conference workshop on imagining feminist futures after COVID-19.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that will come up all right. So thanks very much. I also want to acknowledge I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past and present, acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm talking today about a project that IWDA has been working on for the past 12 months called Imagining Feminist Futures After COVID-19. So I'll start off with some background on the project. Then I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who participated in the pre-conference workshop that we ran for RDI a couple of weeks ago, who's going to report back on part of that discussion before I just wrap up with some sort of next steps for the project. And I noticed from the participant list, there's a couple of other people who participated in that workshop a few weeks back. So welcome, thanks for coming back again. And I'd like to acknowledge you all as co-creators of what we're sharing here today. Okay, so the background for this project came about a bit over 12 months ago now, in sort of that time in March, April 2020. And if it's not too confronting, I want to invite everyone here to just take a minute to cast your mind back to that time. It's the early days of the pandemic. Movie stars are singing Imagine. Tom Hanks caught COVID-19 in Australia. No one could figure out how to get themselves off mute. It was a really unique time, I think. And, you know, on a more serious note, everyone was really just starting to come to terms with the idea that COVID-19 was a disruption that was changing our lives in really vast and unimaginable ways. And it had the potential to cause widespread devastation and really fundamentally change the world that we live in. So it was a really weird time. It felt very unsettled and uncertain, and things were moving very quickly. So particularly in Australia, in terms of the government response during that time, it's really remarkable to think back to how quickly the parameters of what was possible shifted, particularly, as I say, in terms of government policy. So I went back and looked at this in preparing for this presentation, and it was really, you know, within a fortnight or so, we saw just a slew of announcements. We had unemployment payments double, we had childcare fees abolished, we had $1 billion invested in mental health, domestic violence, and emergency relief services, which are all, as I think we all know, really chronically underfunded industries. So I don't want to suggest that these responses were sufficient. And of course, many of them have been wound back. Governments around the world have taken very different responses to the pandemic, not always responding with, you know, supportive measures. But I think what I'm trying to capture here is less about the specifics and more about that moment of disruption in time when it just, all the rules went out the window, and suddenly the parameters of what was possible, what, you know, groups have been advocating for years, suddenly changed completely, and it was a completely different playing field. So part of what we wanted to capture for this project was that moment in time. And I think particularly as women's rights advocates, we're often really focused on the problems. You know, women are experiencing violence now and they need immediate support. But what we can miss with that focus is the opportunity for longer term, more transformative change. How could we change the underlying conditions, the social and gender norms that enable women to experience violence, that enable that violence to go unchecked? And so what we wanted to do with this project was to try and create something that would help us lift our gaze to the future and explore what might be possible now because of this moment of disruption of COVID-19, which wasn't possible before. So to talk about the actual project, we wanted to use futures thinking approaches to explore the trends that we're seeing in the world today, how COVID-19 is interacting with those trends and changing how they might play out in the future, and therefore what we need to do differently now in order to get to more feminist futures. So I've thrown a whole stack of names up on the screen to give you a sense of how many people we worked with. We partnered with a team of women futurists convened by Changeist, which is a Netherlands-based consultancy, but drawing in experts from Australia and around the world who designed an adaptable workshop methodology, which could be run by anyone, regardless of your previous experience with futures thinking, and which would be able to run virtually. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities with the work that Ray's doing in the Pacific. We also had a steering group of women from across the feminist movement to test and refine that methodology, which is now freely available on our website. And I'll put a link to that in the chat. Okay, so on the next slide here, you can see an example of that Facilitators Toolkit, which has guidance on the technology, instructions, and facilitation tips for one of the main exercises in the workshop, which is the Futures Wheel, and sort of tips for facilitation. So it's a really comprehensive guide that, you know, is intended to enable anyone to run one of these workshops. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Futures Wheels, and then Sophie's going to report back on one from the workshop. So the Futures Wheel takes a known trend at the center of the wheel, and it plays out the possible impacts of that trend over time. Some of those impacts are positive, some can be negative, and there can be multiple impacts at each level, which don't have to exist in the same possible future. So you're really playing out different scenarios in sort of quite a collaborative way. So then in the workshop, participants answer a series of questions which support a rough process of backcasting, which is another sort of futures tool, which takes a desired future state and then works backwards to identify, well, what's the critical change that is going to be required to get us to that state? What do we need to do differently now? And then participants use that information to write up a scenario of their feminist future. And I'm just going to mention here, I haven't focused heavily on the trends that are part of this workshop, but since it came up in Ray's presentation, I thought I'd just mention that the futurists that we work with to develop this workshop methodology do, horizon scanning all the time. And so they drew from that sort of analysis a bank of about 20 global trends, which cover things like climate, technology, trust in institutions, social movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter. And the workshop process enables groups to sort of take these trends and contextualize them in their own experience. So, geographic, locational, in terms of their focus of activism, their place in the movement. And then it also supports people to put a feminist lens over those trends. So think about the other intersectional forces that might be coming into play, like capitalism, like patriarchy, like racism, how those issues might be interacting with the trend and the way that it's going to play out over time. So what I'll do now is hand over to Sophie to talk through the trend that her group explored in the workshop.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you everyone for the opportunity once again. As already been introduced, I am from Papua New Guinea, from the smallest island province, which is Manus Island. So when I speak, I'll probably share a bit of how it is back in the community. Now, speaking about increased local farming and traditional practices, over time, COVID-19 has brought a lot of challenges. And one thing that we've seen, my group consisted of 4 participants from Vietnam, Thailand, and of course, Papua New Guinea. And we've outlined that one thing that we've noticed in our communities is local knowledge in farming and traditional practices, and having that parallel coexisting of modern and traditional knowledges, and how we are to survive as a race in the post-pandemic era, such as COVID-19. And so we have spoken about how the government and in terms of agriculture, land, food, and climate change, where we can have the support from government and also the menfolk and the community and other fellow women in our community as well to support in terms of local farming and traditional practices. And one thing we outlined was land ownership and scarcity because of cultural norms. And also we identify that we need more government support in that space so that it recognize and give women that equal partnership and ownership of land. And also knowing that women or Indigenous women in society, we're all from developing nations where women have traditional wisdom and knowledge in terms of food preservation and in terms of local farming and agriculture practices. So that was one thing that we kind of recognize that we need to, in order to coexist with the community, women have a role in passing that traditional knowledge to the future generation. Also, we identified that we should be increasing local farming in terms of like speaking from my perspective from the Pacific, we have a lot of challenges, like, for example, climate change. We now notice that food has become scarce, or the quality of food is no longer like before. And we acknowledge that we should be bringing back traditional resilient practices and all at the same time coexist with modern practices and draw from the positive in order to move forward. And that's where we feel that women have a very important role to play, because women are very multi-tasked, and that social and cultural norm of seeing women confined to kitchen and raising up a family is no longer, we should really move away from that and embrace the fact that women can also participate in contributing in terms of decision making, because in a lot of, sorry, next slide. Yeah. Now, looking at these trends, we realize that those gender stereotypes have to be removed, and women have to be empowered through economic empowerment or through engagement, through education, where women can also be equal partners in decision making. And so our team, which is consisted of these 3 amazing women from these developing nations, but also studying here in Australia, we noticed that to move forward, we have to inform our men, and also our men and also government should embrace and appreciate where women can come in, given that we have that capacity as decision makers, as well as the traditional knowledge that we carry. And so we looked into all this, and so we realized that moving forward, women should be given that space and opportunity to contribute as well. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Something that I really loved about this workshop, so I've put up the other impact futures wheels that the groups came up with, and I won't go through them in detail, but you can even just see visually, you know, the different approaches that groups have taken, the sort of mind map that comes up. This group drew a lot of extra arrows of interconnectedness and dependencies. And the other 2 scenarios, something that I really like about the team Sophie was part of, and then also the pink team from this workshop, is that their future scenarios really hark back to the past. And, you know, I think sometimes we can get hung up in futures thinking that everything has to be shiny and sci-fi, you know, robotic futures. And actually, you know, a feminist future could look like returning to more Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the world, and that's a really desirable future state that we want to aim for. So I really love that as part of that workshop. So I'll just wrap up with a few notes on where we're going next with this project. So we've run about 10 or so workshops now with different groups from different parts of the world, from you know, Australian organisations, from organisations in Asia and the Pacific, groups that have, you know, people coming from all different parts of the world, as this workshop did. And what we're doing is part of the project is that we're publishing the outcomes of all of these workshops on our website, so that they're sort of freely available for anyone to look at and do their own analysis of, do their own sense making of, see what strikes them in terms of the futures and the trend analysis that those groups have done. But we want to do some of that analysis as well, and sort of think about, well, what's that telling us, you know, as IWDA, as a feminist movement, what is this telling us about what we need to be doing differently in order to see the kinds of futures that we want to see? So we'll be doing that over the next couple of months. And also I want to think really creatively about how we communicate that. So not just originally we were going to write a synthesis report, but really this project has sort of emphasized that we want to break out of that kind of like just dry report writing approach and try and think of something more creative to demonstrate those findings and share them with the world. So I'll just leave you with this final slide, which has a link to download the toolkit and a contact information, which I can pop in the chat as well. And I'll pass back to you, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice and Sophie. I'm sure lots of delegates are going to be heading to the IWDA website and downloading the toolkit, and approaching you, Ray, for consulting advice, no doubt. It's great to see the prominence given to horizon futures thinking and scenario planning in these presentations. We've just got a couple of minutes to go, and I can see that questions are being asked and answered in the chat. Ray, there is one live question there for you, asking about predicting the future best done by shaping it proactively. And what would you say are the challenges in facilitating workshops using these tools?
Thank you, Chris. That's a tricky one. Firstly, this activities that we did online, they really are best done in person. I mean, the difference of working, when you're working with people in the room, seeing faces, having all of those casual chats in between, are quite transformationally different. So I think that when you shift to an online environment, you've got to change your goals a little bit. There's different things that you can do better and worse. But I think the idea about shaping it proactively is interesting. There's these very different pieces of futures work, and I really loved a lot of the components and approaches that Alice just introduced there too. And some of them are very much focused on the world out there. What are the changes happening in the world out there that might affect us? And then you can think about, which is usually horizon scanning, then you can think about what you might do in response. But other important parts of futures thinking, of course, are about visioning, shaping the future, proactively thinking, well, rather than trying to predict the future, how can we shape it? And I think that's the greater the level of disruption that's happening, and the greater the uncertainty, the bigger your ability to proactively shape that future, or the more important that approach might be. And the key part of the question, for instance, was it easy for participants to shift thinking beyond what currently is? It's not easy, and I think that it depends on people's background and experience. Some people, to do their job well, they have to be very, very focused. For example, technical experts. That's a very different way of thinking to just thinking about big picture, blue horizon stuff. And at the same time, if that's your norm, it would be very difficult for me to shift into a highly technical activity. But I think by hearing from people with very different backgrounds and working through these collaborative processes, everyone can do it. And there was really, really good buy-in across that process of people who wouldn't normally think in that way, using these sorts of approaches. I'm assuming Alice is experiencing similar things, I hope, and actually, yes, shifting their mind into that way of thinking. And it was, people loved it. I don't know if Alice has got anything to share.
Toss to you, Alice.
Sure. Yeah, I can add an example from another workshop that I was part of. I think something that we've seen is that, it is really hard to sort of lift up out of the everyday mindset. And, I think as women's rights advocates, we're always talking about the problems, and I mentioned this, but, violence against women, it's such a massive problem. It's such an immediate existential crisis facing women that it's really hard to sort of lift up. And so one of the very first workshops I was in, I was sort of having this conversation with someone, and we realized, like, the feminist future that we managed to come up with out of the trend of increasing violence against women in the context of COVID, a really obviously negative and disastrous trend, was a feminist future where traditional family structures become much less important and children are raised in community, which again is bringing back these kind of non-Western traditional ways of living. And we realized the critical thing was that women who wanted to leave violent relationships during or after COVID needed to be able to do that. And so it, in order to get us to this future where, the kind of heteronormative nuclear family model was less important. So it was a really interesting, it brought us back to the immediate problem, but we were able to kind of lift above and think about this really different looking future that was quite exciting and brought sort of a different, I guess, just a different lens on that immediate problem.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, Amanda or Vicki, did you want to jump in there?
We're both being very quiet.
Yes,
Did you have anything to add?
I don't think so, actually. Not
Yeah.
at this point. No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, though.
Okay, no trouble. All right, I think we are going to have to wrap up. We just have less than a minute to go, and I know we're on a very tight schedule. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you particularly Vicki, Amanda, Ray, Alice, and Sophie for fantastic presentations. And thank you to the delegates for the great questions. Please, if you have a moment, take a your time to look at the answers in the chat. I'm sorry there wasn't more time to answer them in discussion, but please do enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris and everyone. And I loved your presentations, guys.
Likewise, thank you all.
Likewise, thanks everyone. Bye.